I was still wearing black when the phone vibrated. The funeral director had just closed the register, and the quiet followed me home like dust clinging to my coat. I hadn't even set my keys down when Grant Holloway's name appeared on the screen. I answered. "Irila," he said, crisp and detached. "We need to address your absence without authorization." The sentence landed before sympathy ever had a chance to exist. I stood in my kitchen, shoes still on, coat buttoned wrong, listening as the CEO of the company I had helped keep alive reduced my mother's funeral to a compliance issue. Grant spoke in the polished tone of authority, the kind shaped by boardrooms and decks. "Discipline matters." He continued. "Precedent matters. Leaders must set examples." Grief, apparently, did not qualify as an exception worth discussing. My role had never been symbolic. As director of operations, I dealt in consequences, not slogans. When suppliers failed, I found replacements. When systems stalled, I kept them moving. I worked in realities that didn't fit on slides. Grant lived above that layer. He governed through frameworks, believing control came from policy and certainty passed for judgment. The call was efficient by design, no questions, no review. He framed the termination as fairness. The same rule applied to everyone, a necessary cut to protect culture. He sounded confident, almost instructional, like this moment belonged in a leadership manual. To him, this was textbook management, clean and decisive. When he finished speaking, there was a pause he hadn't planned for. I didn't argue. I didn't explain the service, the flowers, the final signatures. I let the silence stretch just long enough to matter. Then I said one sentence, calm and exact. "You should have asked who my mother was." I ended the call and left the CEO alone with a certainty that had just crossed a line he didn't know existed yet. Losing someone you love changes the weight of every decision, especially when the world refuses to slow down with you. If you've ever had to keep going while your heart was breaking, I hope today brings you a little peace and something kind. Tell me where you're listening from. I'd like to know I'm not alone in this moment. Stay with me. And if this story speaks to you, consider subscribing. What happened next didn't end with that call. I sat alone at my kitchen table, the house too quiet, letting memory do what anger could not yet manage. It pulled me backward, to the moments the company liked to forget, the ones never captured in glossy updates or investor decks. I remembered the year the supply chain nearly collapsed, ships stalled, suppliers vanished, and everyone waited for someone else to decide. I didn't wait. I called ports, rerouted contracts, accepted personal blame to buy time. When executives panicked behind closed doors, I stayed on the floor, answering calls, calming partners, keeping products moving just enough to survive another week. Survival wasn't heroic. It was methodical. During the worst crisis, I stood between chaos and collapse while leadership argued about optics. I rewrote schedules overnight, negotiated penalties down to tolerable losses, and made decisions that would never earn applause. My reward was continuity. The company lived. And later, they called it strategy. Grant Holloway arrived after that danger passed. He inherited stability and mistook it for inevitability. He didn't trust people who remembered hard years. He trusted policies. He believed discipline created culture, that cutting visibly proved authority. To Grant, experience was baggage, and loyalty was a risk. He spoke about standards while ignoring the cost of enforcing them without judgment. What Grant never learned was how close the company had come to disappearing. Before the rebranding, before the slogans, there had been an edge. Banks refused extensions. Investors stalled. The future narrowed to a few fragile options. Help arrived quietly, without press or celebration, and without conditions that demanded recognition. That truth surfaced hours later as I sat there, hands wrapped around cold coffee. I logged into an old legal archive, not searching for revenge, just closing doors in my mind. A document title caught my eye. Ordinary and dull. Inside was a reference to a private bridge loan. Short-term, convertible, never mentioned publicly. Then I saw the lender's name, Margaret Moore, my mother. The date preceded every success story they told afterward. I closed the file slowly, understanding why patience mattered now. They had erased memory, they had erased context, and they had no idea what they had just stepped over. I stayed seated, breathing evenly, letting the realization settle, knowing restraint would shape the next move more than fury ever could. That lesson had been taught long before, by the woman they underestimated so completely. I didn't grow up thinking my mother was powerful. She wasn't wealthy, wasn't connected, and never spoke the language of boardrooms. She worked, saved carefully, and believed that responsibility meant showing up when others quietly stepped away. That belief followed her everywhere, including into moments she never spoke about. When the company was failing, she didn't arrive with confidence or demands. Banks had already said no. Credit lines were frozen. Executives were panicking in private while pretending stability in public. My mother watched all of it from a distance, listened, asked careful questions, and did the one thing she always did when people hesitated. She refused to leave. She loaned the company money when no one else would. Not as charity, and not as a favor. She insisted it be documented, clean, and limited. The agreement was written as a convertible note, simple and precise, with terms designed to protect both sides. It wasn't generosity, it was accountability. She believed help without structure created dependence, not survival. No announcement followed, no press release. The money arrived quietly, just enough to keep operations alive until contracts stabilized and revenue returned. Leadership moved on quickly once danger passed. Success was reframed as vision. The loan became a footnote, then a memory, then nothing at all. By the time Grant Holloway took over, the story had been polished smooth. He spoke about discipline and growth, never asking how close the company had come to disappearing. The note remained buried in legal archives, untouched, uncelebrated, and apparently forgotten. No one in the current leadership bothered to look back far enough to see it. Sitting alone, reading those documents, I felt something settle into clarity. My mother hadn't saved the company out of loyalty or ego. She had done it because walking away would have been easier. And she didn't believe in easy exits. The loan was never a gift. It was leverage, quiet and patient, designed to matter only if it needed to. The final page made that clear. The conversion clause had already been triggered years earlier, automatically, without drama. Shares had been allocated, rights defined, and ownership established pending a single formality. All that remained was confirmation of inheritance. I closed the file and exhaled slowly. Nothing had changed in the room, but everything had changed in my understanding. They thought they had erased history. In reality, history had been waiting, intact, disciplined, and legally prepared. Long before any of them decided I was disposable, that realization didn't bring anger or triumph. Only a steady awareness that patience was now strategy. Silence was protection, and the next steps would unfold on paper, not in raised voices or rushed reactions over time carefully. From here, the story begins to change direction. I didn't hear from the company first. I heard from its lawyer. Laura Kingsley asked if we could talk privately. Her tone neutral, precise, already professional. She didn't offer condolences, and I didn't need them. This wasn't about grief anymore. We met without ceremony, without urgency, as if time itself had slowed to allow accuracy. Laura confirmed what I already suspected, but hadn't said aloud. My mother's shares represented 51% of the company. They had been legally assigned to the estate years ago, triggered quietly, documented thoroughly, and left untouched. Only final inheritance confirmation remained. Control existed, even if no one recognized it yet. Laura explained timelines, filings, signatures. She explained consequences. I listened without interrupting. Power was no longer hypothetical, but it was also not urgent. I chose not to disclose anything, no announcements, no corrections, no satisfaction. Silence gave me leverage. Waiting allowed patterns to reveal themselves. Grant Holloway continued restructuring as if nothing had changed. He cut teams, consolidated roles, praised decisiveness. He believed authority was loudest when exercised quickly. I watched from a distance, measuring restraint against impulse. Every decision he made simplified what would come later. Power was shifting, but it did not need an audience. When Laura asked what I wanted to do next, I gave her one instruction: schedule a board meeting, frame it as a memorial for a deceased shareholder. Nothing more. No confrontation, no agenda item labeled power. Grant would attend, so would everyone else. I ended the call steady, composed, and fully aware of what restraint had preserved. The company thought it was cleaning house. It didn't realize it was preparing to remember who saved it. That waiting period tested me more than anger ever could. Control meant resisting the urge to explain, justify, or correct the record. Each quiet day increased the contrast between how Grant acted and what he believed he owned. I began documenting, not emotionally, but structurally: notes, dates, decisions, approvals. I let his momentum continue uninterrupted. Speed creates errors, and errors create records. Laura kept me informed without urgency. Paper moved quietly, filings advanced, nothing leaked. The inheritance process was procedural, unemotional, and exact. I respected that. My mother would have insisted on it. She believed control without patience collapsed under its own weight. I carried that belief forward, allowing silence to do its work. By the time the meeting request circulated, the shift was irreversible. No announcement could change it. No protest could stop it. I wasn't waiting to strike. I was waiting to conclude. Power had already moved. The board would simply learn where it now resided. And when they did, the noise Grant relied on would no longer matter. Everything ahead would unfold formally, legally, and without raised voices. That was the control I chose to keep for myself alone. I knew the request would unsettle him. The meeting notice went out framed as a memorial, brief and respectful, nothing confrontational. Still, tension crept in before the date arrived, the kind that tightens rooms long before anyone speaks. Grant Holloway reacted exactly as expected. He complained to anyone who would listen, calling it unnecessary, emotional, a distraction. "We have work to do," he said. According to one director, "We don't run a company on sentiment." Yet he didn't cancel it. He couldn't. A board meeting, even a symbolic one, was not something a CEO could simply refuse without explanation. To the rest of the board, it was routine, a procedural acknowledgement of a deceased shareholder. No strategy, no decisions, no risk. Several directors treated it like a box to check, an hour to endure before returning to numbers and forecasts. They assumed I wanted closure. They assumed I wanted sympathy. Grant assumed something else. He believed I was playing the victim, stretching grief into relevance. He watched the calendar closely, reread the agenda, and asked Laura Kingsley twice why the meeting required full attendance. "Is there something I should know?" he asked her. Laura's reply was measured. "Only that your presence is required." That word lingered. Required. It wasn't how Grant spoke to people. It wasn't how people spoke to him. In the days leading up to the meeting, his tone shifted. The confidence sharpened into control. He issued memos, accelerated decisions, praised discipline louder than usual. It felt defensive, like movement meant to outrun a shadow. I recognized the pattern. Leaders who sense instability tighten their grip instead of asking why the floor feels uneven. I said nothing. Silence had already done enough. When Grant finally asked me directly, his voice carried irritation masked as concern. "Arila, I assume this is about your mother," he said. "We'll keep it brief." I answered calmly, "That's up to the board." That was the moment the air changed. He heard something he couldn't categorize. Not anger, not gratitude, control, but not his. The final agenda circulated the night before. No one objected, no one declined. Attendance was mandatory, Laura confirmed in writing. Grant read that line twice. By morning, the meeting wasn't just a formality. It was a pause everyone felt, but no one could explain. The company moved forward on paper, but underneath, something waited. Even Grant sensed it now. The chill wasn't grief, it was anticipation. Quiet and precise, settling into the room before anyone arrived. I stayed still, letting the pressure build. Knowing uncertainty weakens authority faster than resistance. Grant had built power on certainty. Now he was forced to attend, to listen, to sit without control. And that quiet obligation frightened him more than any open challenge ever could. It would soon reshape everything he believed permanent. "You're tracking very well. Hold on a few more seconds. This part is for the observant." The room was quiet in a way that made sound feel intrusive. No one spoke while Laura Kingsley arranged her papers. Her movements careful, deliberate, almost ceremonial. This was not A.D. She began with the background. Voice steady, unemotional. "The company accepted a private bridge loan during the liquidity crisis," she said. Heads lifted. Grant Holloway shifted slightly, impatience tightening his jaw. Laura continued, outlining the terms short duration, fixed protections, and a conversion clause tied to recovery milestones. There was no dram as she read. I watched the board absorb what had never been framed for them before. The loan had not been a donation. It had been structured as a convertible note, executed legally, approved formally, and then forgotten. Laura explained how the conversion had been triggered years earlier, automatically, without fanfare, without anyone revisiting the file. Then she moved to voting rights. Upon conversion, she said, the shares carried full co-silence followed, thick and absolute. I felt it before I saw it. Grant froze. His pen stopped moving. His expression didn't change at first, but his posture did, collapsing inward by degrees. He opened his mouth once, then closed it. Whatever Laura finished the sentence without pause. Those shares are held by the estate of Margaret Moore. They now belong to Arila Moore. Shh. The word controlling echoed longer than it should have. No one interrupted. No one questioned the math. Years of authority shifted in a single paragraph. Grant stared at the table, then at the documents, then back at Laura. That's not possible, he said quietly. Finally, his voice lacked force. Laura didn't respond emotionally. She slid copies across the table. It's documented, she replied. It's final. I didn't speak. There was no need. Power didn't require explanation anymore. The board began asking procedural questions, not about me, but about timelines and disclosures. Grant sat silent, absorbing a reality he had never audited. When Laura concluded, she asked if there were any objections. There were none. I still hadn't said a word when the meeting moved forward. I made no announcements. I offered no directives. I didn't touch personnel decisions. That restraint confused Grant more than the loss itself. He had prepared for confrontation, not control without noise. The meeting ended formally. People stood, shaken, careful. Grant remained seated. As I gathered my notes, I understood something clearly. Authority had changed hands without spectacle. Nothing had been taken from him publicly. He simply no longer owned what he believed was his, and I had not yet decided what to do with that fact. at all now. The shock of the meeting didn't end when the doors closed. It followed Grant Holloway out into the days that came after, tightening every conversation, every decision, every glance. I could feel the tension ripple through the company as he began to fight back. Grant started with the board, one by one. He requested private conversations, reframing the situation as confusion, legacy error, legal technicality. This was never meant to transfer control, he told one director, his voice controlled but sharp. He leaned on history, loyalty, urgency. Some listened politely, none committed. The documents were too clear, the signatures too old, the math too final. When persuasion failed, pressure followed. Grant reached out to contacts in the press, hinting at instability, at internal disputes, at a company distracted by sentiment. A short article appeared, vague and cautious. Within hours, our legal team issued a response, factual and calm, correcting inaccuracies without escalation. The story died quietly. Truth didn't need volume. Behind the scenes, Grant pushed harder. He challenged Laura Kingsley directly, questioning timelines and authority. "You're overstepping," he said during one tense call. Laura replied without raising her voice, "I'm enforcing existing rights." The line went silent after that. What Grant didn't anticipate was isolation. Directors stopped returning his messages quickly. Executives deferred decisions upward, waiting. His authority still existed on paper, but it no longer moved people. Power drains fastest when no one says it out loud. I watched all of it without intervening. Restraint wasn't passive, it was deliberate. Every attempt Grant made created another record, another confirmation that process, not personality, now governed the company. He began to understand this too late. The moment it broke through came unexpectedly. Grant asked for a meeting, just the two of us. His confidence had thinned. "You can't seriously expect me to stay after this," he said, frustration slipping into his voice. I met his gaze and answered evenly, "I expect you to fulfill your contract." That was when desperation surfaced. He had prepared for termination, for humiliation, for removal. He had not prepared to remain. Being fired would have made him a victim. Staying made him accountable. I made it clear there would be no immediate personnel changes, no dramatic exits, no symbolic victories. Grant would remain CEO in title, bound by governance, oversight, and limits he could no longer bend. The board supported it unanimously. As he left the room, I could see the weight settle in. Resistance had failed, noise had failed, influence had failed. He was still standing, but completely alone, trapped inside a structure he once believed he controlled. And for the first time, he understood that being kept was far worse than being removed. His options narrowed to obedience or exposure, and neither resembled the power he once wielded so casually, every single day. Power didn't vanish after the meeting. It was redirected, narrowed, and formalized. Grant Holloway kept his title, his office, his public posture, but everything beneath that surface changed shape. Authority without control is a performance. And Grant was now performing for an audience that no longer applauded. The board moved first, quietly approving an amended executive agreement. It preserved continuity, they said. Stability during transition. What it actually did was place a leash where freedom used to be. Grant could no longer sign contracts independently. Hiring and termination required oversight. Strategic decisions passed through review. Every action generated a trail. Grant reported to me, not ceremonially, not symbolically, but in writing, weekly, precisely. Memos replaced instincts, requests replaced commands. I read everything without commentary, returning notes stripped of emotion. Precision, not punishment, shaped the process. He tried to test the limits early. A proposed appointment crossed my desk without sufficient justification. I returned it with one sentence: insufficient rationale. The silence that followed stretched longer than any argument would have. He learned quickly. Meetings changed tone. Grant spoke less. When he did, eyes shifted to me, waiting. Authority had inverted without announcement. The company adjusted because systems do. When incentives realign, control doesn't shout, it recalibrates. The cruelty of it was duration, no dramatic removal, no single moment of release. Grant remained visible, accountable, constrained. Each decision was examined, documented, measured against policy. He could no longer improvise morality. It was written for him. The new contract finalized that reality. Buried deep was a revised ethics clause, expansive and unforgiving. Any deviation from stated values, any misuse of authority, any reputational risk triggered immediate review. Grant signed without protest. He had no leverage left. I watched the realization settle slowly. He wasn't being punished. He was being governed. The structure he once enforced without empathy now enclosed him completely. Justice doesn't always arrive loudly. Sometimes it arrives as routine. Weeks passed. The company stabilized. Decisions improved. Fear left the room. Grant followed the rules with increasing care. Knowing each step mattered now. His power had been reduced to compliance. I felt no satisfaction, only resolution. This was not revenge. It was alignment. He kept the title he valued. I kept the control that mattered. And the longer it lasted, the clearer the lesson became. Authority without integrity eventually answers to both, whether it expects to or not. What surprised me most was how ordinary it all became. No one whispered. No one staged resistance. Systems absorbed the change and continued. Grant adapted because he had to. Every safeguard worked exactly as designed. Slow and exact. The leash was invisible, but it held. That endurance, not collapse, was the consequence he never anticipated. It proved that sustained accountability outlasts anger, spectacle, and the brief satisfaction of dramatic endings, for everyone involved. The end didn't arrive with noise. It arrived through routine, the way consequences often do when systems are allowed to work without interference. Weeks after the restructuring, the company felt calmer, steadier, as if order had quietly reclaimed its place. Grant Holloway unraveled on his own. It started small. A decision pushed through without full disclosure. A conversation held off record. Old habits surfaced under pressure. Authority had once protected him from scrutiny. Now it magnified every misstep. Compliance teams flagged inconsistencies. Legal logged deviations. Nothing dramatic, just accumulation. The ethics clause did what it was written to do. A review was triggered automatically, unemotional and precise. Grant tried to explain it away. "This is being blown out of proportion," he told the board. Voice tight, defensive. The statement landed flat. Process doesn't respond to tone. When the findings were summarized, there was no outrage, no spectacle, just facts, policy violations, failure to disclose, breach of conduct expectations. Grant argued history. He argued intent. He argued necessity. None of it mattered anymore. Structure had replaced persuasion. The board convened without tension. Decisions were made quickly, unanimously. Grant was asked to step down. Effective immediately. The language was careful, almost gentle. No accusations beyond what was documented. No press conference planned. Continuity would be preserved. The company would move forward. Grant finally looked at me then. Not with anger, not even resentment. With recognition. "I see it now," he said quietly. "This ended the day I fired you." It wasn't an apology. It was an admission. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to correct. He gathered his things later, discreetly. No one watched. No one whispered. He left through the same doors he had used every day, just another executive concluding a term. The absence of drama felt intentional, deserved. In the weeks that followed, stability returned fully. Teams rebuilt trust. Decisions slowed just enough to regain accuracy. The company functioned better, without urgency masquerading as leadership. Order doesn't require force. It requires alignment. I felt satisfaction, but not triumph. This wasn't about victory. It was about balance restored. Grant hadn't been defeated by me. He had been undone by his own rules, applied without favoritism, without emotion. The quiet mattered most. No scandal meant no distraction. No spectacle meant no rewriting of events. The record stood clean. Cause led to effect, plainly. Grant lost nothing unfairly. He lost exactly what he misused. And in that clarity, the lesson settled firmly. Power taken lightly dissolves under accountability. Power exercised with patience endures. As I reviewed the final transition documents, I understood something my mother had always known. Justice doesn't need anger to function. It only needs time, structure, and the courage to let systems speak when people finally stop interrupting them. I didn't take the CEO chair when it was offered. The board expected it. Assumed control meant ambition. But I declined without hesitation. Titles weren't the point. They never had been. What mattered was direction, not position. And I had learned that lesson long before any vote was cast. Instead, I focused on rebuilding what urgency and fear had damaged. We slowed decisions, restored accountability, and replaced intimidation with clarity. Managers were measured by outcomes, not obedience. Absence was no longer treated as disloyalty. People were trusted to be human again. Culture wasn't enforced through punishment. It was rebuilt through consistency. The company didn't need another dominant voice. It needed balance. I worked with the board to restructure governance, strengthen oversight, and separate authority from ego. Power was redistributed deliberately, with safeguards that outlived personalities. Systems were designed to protect the quiet contributors, the ones who keep things working without applause. As the noise faded, something unexpected happened. Productivity improved. Turnover slowed. Conversations changed tone. Stability returned without fanfare. Justice, I realized, doesn't always arrive as correction. Sometimes it arrives as relief. I thought often about my mother during those weeks. She never sought recognition for what she did. She believed responsibility was not something you display, but something you carry, especially when no one is watching. She understood that saving something doesn't mean owning it forever. It means leaving it better than you found it. Her legacy wasn't the shares or the control. It was restraint. It was patience. It was knowing when to step forward and when to step aside. I honored that by refusing spectacle. There was no victory speech, no celebration, no final word spoken from a position of dominance. The story ended without applause, exactly as it should have. Order returned. Harm was addressed. Nothing more was required. That understanding allowed me to step back without bitterness, knowing the work would continue without me, guided by principles stronger than any single leader, and protected by structures designed to remember the cost of forgetting people when power feels convenient. Some people inherit money. I inherited responsibility. I didn't win by being louder, faster, or more ruthless. I won by remembering what most people forget when power enters the room, that work has weight. People have history, and dignity isn't optional. Standing where I am now, I understand something clearly real. Justice doesn't feel explosive. It feels steady. It feels like being able to breathe again after holding everything in for too long. This story isn't just about a company or a boardroom. It's about what happens when someone treats your pain as inconvenience, and you choose not to become bitter in return. I carried anger for a moment, but I carried restraint much longer. And restraint, I learned, lasts. It protects you. It outlives ego. If you stayed with me until the end, thank you. Truly. I'd love to know, have you ever been pushed aside at your weakest moment? And if you feel comfortable, would you share a piece of your story? Tell me where you're listening from right now. Knowing you're here makes this feel less solitary. If this story resonated, a simple like helps more than you know. Sharing it might help someone else feel seen. And if you'd like to stay for more stories about quiet strength, accountability, and dignity under pressure, consider subscribing. Some lessons don't shout, but they stay with you.